Sometimes my husband and I would be in the middle of a heated discussion, and I would suddenly stop and think, are we fighting about our differences or are we fighting about our cultural differences? Hi, my name is Tian. I am a stay-at-home mom navigating motherhood, marriage, and faith in a multicultural family. I am from China and my husband's from the US. My oldest is 3.5 years old and my youngest is just about to turn 1. It still shocks me every time. How has it been a year already? When we first got married, I knew our differences would cook up something interesting. It would affect how we communicate, how we parent, how we build our family culture overall. But little did we know what we actually signed up for. 5 years into the formation of our little Chinese American family. In this video, I'll be sharing what I've learned about cross-cultural marriage and also how I'm learning to parent with the best of both worlds. And I'm gonna stop holding on to this mic. Okay, let's try that. Before my husband and I got married, we have sat down and talked about this extensively. We ask ourselves, do we want to be an American family or do we want to be a Chinese family? And we have concluded that we want to be neither. We want to be a Christ-following family, period. And that means putting our faith before our cultural identity. We can't take anything for granted, and often we have to communicate a lot just to get by. When conflicts arise, which they often do, we pray and we resort to biblical principles for resolution. And oftentimes we need a third-party accountability to move forward. Mentorship is beyond a blessing to our family. And we're very blessed to have pastors who are from the US but have lived in China for over a decade, so they are fluent in not just the culture but also the language. They understand both worlds. We love them and we trust them, and they're very wise to help us detangle our spiritual and cultural struggles in times of conflict. If you're in a cross-cultural marriage, I cannot emphasize enough the importance of having mentorship. We've also learned over the years, if we don't spend extra time on communicating proactively and to check in with each other on how different areas of our lives are going, we will probably end up in conflict because our expectations were shaped by completely different cultures and upbringings. I like to think of that as like a perk of cross-cultural marriage, where you learned early on to not assume much so you communicate a lot more. But honestly, it's a basic principle that should be applied to all marriages, whether you're from the same culture or not. We just don't have the luxury to assume much. So at the very top of our family meeting template, there is a quote that says, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And that is why every week we have a family meeting. It's a way we initiate proactive communication. During the meeting, we would be talking about the logistics, things like schedules, meals, and budget. And we will also check in on unresolved conflicts. And you'll be surprised how many times my husband thinks we're fine, but I don't. And vice versa. It's not just me. We'll also ask each other how we're doing spiritually, emotionally, and physically. And that includes our intimacy. We will end with prayers, and that covers all our wins and struggles, because at the end of the day, we believe that our marriage is God-ordained and God-centered. So I start this topic with talking about our marriage because it is such a huge component of our lives. And I've learned that being proactive, not reactive, makes all the difference. If you want to see how I apply the same principle and mindset to managing my own life as a stay-at-home mom, check out my video on our daily and weekly routine. In that video, I'll talk about this more extensively. Next up, I want to talk about motherhood and cultural expectations. In other words, how do both cultures define a good mom? On the Chinese side, traditionally, Chinese moms are seen as devoted and hands-on, but modern Chinese mothers actually return to work very quickly. And they have a lot more space to actually attend to other aspects of their life apart from motherhood. Well, who takes care of the kids, you might ask? The answer is grandparents. In Chinese culture, there is a lot of intergenerational involvement in child rearing. It is not uncommon for Chinese grandparents to retire once their grandkids are born. Grandparents play a huge role in hands-on child rearing, which can be both such a blessing but also a challenge. So they are very involved and often have strong opinions on parenting, or you could call them grandparenting. So they're very relaxed on boundaries and rules, and you might even end up with situations like cake for breakfast, which has genuinely happened. So the picture of a good mom often has to fit into the dynamic of intergenerational family. A good mom often knows when to step in and when to step back. How do you balance that kind of relational dynamic with your mother and father or in-laws? That plays into the definition of a good mother. And you would be surprised that stay-at-home mom is actually not that common of a thing in Chinese culture. In the US, mothers staying at home is seen as a real job, but in China, not necessarily. In fact, I often get asked, why are you still staying at home? Your oldest is getting older. You should think more about your own career and build something for yourself. The idea that if the kids are old enough for preschool, but they're not at preschool is unfathomable. The fact that my oldest is old enough for preschool, but he's not at preschool is just so hard to compute for a Chinese brain. I think it's important to mention the communist influence on motherhood in China. So one of the influences on women is that everyone needs to work and be a contributing member to the society, which is a great thing, but not when it devalues the work of moms who decide to stay at home. So the idea of staying at home for an extended period of time is actually extremely rare. In fact, the idea of homeschooling is almost unheard of. Education should be outsourced and mainly academically based. So individualistic development is not really valued unless it renders better chances of getting into a better school. So success of parenting or motherhood is often measured by the kid's academic achievements. The American culture actually really values stay-at-home mom and having the mom being close to the children while they are still young. Oops, I'm really struggling with the mic today. So I have never been asked by an American why I am still staying at home with my kids while my oldest is already 3.5 years old. It's not really anything that people think is weird. Another thing I've observed about American culture is that it has a lot more respect for different ways of parenting. So parenting is a lot more individualized when there is less extended family's involvement. Many parents don't actually follow the way that they were raised. Instead, they take on a more flexible, personal approach. It's not uncommon at all for parents to have a completely different method from their own families. But as I described in the Chinese culture, everyone's in everyone's business. And I remember my Chinese family having a lot of opinions on how I address my kids. And you're not gonna believe how many or what kinds of comments I've gotten about how I should hold my baby. Okay, so how do I navigate all this? At the end of the day, faith is my anchor. So instead of asking, should I do it the Chinese way or the American way, I ask, God, what is your plan for our family? In some cases, what does it mean to leave and clean while honoring my father and my mother, which in plain language just means how do I respect the tradition that I am from? Oftentimes, the answer can't please everyone, and we just have to make peace with that because we do as unto the Lord. We can't make everyone happy. Practically, what that looks like is that we value a generational family and their involvement, but we also really stand our ground on our parenting philosophies. I have embraced my season as a stay-at-home mom, but I also serve at my church and I pursue creative work because I believe God has given me a season for both motherhood and ministry. Learning to balance that is super hard, but as time goes by, I am slowly gaining more confidence. This season of figuring out my identity as a mom has really pushed me to examine where I got my ideas about motherhood. Am I parenting this way because of my upbringing? Am I parenting this way because of my cultural expectations? Is it because of what everyone else around me is doing? Or is it genuinely because of what God is calling me to? It truly is a wonderful opportunity to be able to design the family culture in which my kids grow up in. And I see that as really a privilege. You see, with every generation, there is a chance to start something new, a chance to break generational curses or to pass down some beautiful heritage. So at the end of the day, I am not trying to be an American good mom or a Chinese good mom. I am just trying to be the mom that God has called me to be. And now let's look at the interesting ways that these two cultures parent differently. Particularly, I want to emphasize the strength that two cultures have. Chinese culture is very merit-based. Achievement, perseverance, and discipline are high virtues. And that is how I was brought up. My mom particularly has the personality of hitting a wall and taking that wall down. So I am not very good at giving myself or others grace, which shows up in my parenting as well. In Chinese culture, children are expected to meet high standards, and there is a strong awareness of of how they compare to others. In plain language, we compare a lot, whether it's academic or social expectations. If the kids can't meet that, then they need to try harder. I'm not saying this is how I'm trying to parent my kids, but these are the natural tendencies that come with my cultural upbringings. On the other hand, American culture is very grace-based, so there's less pressure in conforming to a standard. In fact, American culture prides itself in not having a standard. There is a lot more awareness of the child being born as a unique individual outside of whatever environment they're born into. There is usually less pressure in figuring out what the highest standard that is humanly achievable and comparing ourselves to that. It gives room for the child to discover independence and explore their own personality, sometimes to a fault. Anyway, so a struggling child is often met with more gentle encouragement and support rather than pressure to achieve and just try harder. So a simple example is that in a classroom environment, if a kid is struggling to pronounce a new word in Chinese culture, that child is most likely met with criticism, whereas in the American classroom setting, the child is more likely going to be given comments like, "That was a nice try, can we try again?" So is one way necessarily better than another? Not necessarily. I do believe there is a good moderation. The way I see it is that the Chinese culture is very strong on the truth side, and the American culture is very good on the grace side. And this is where my faith challenges me the most. How do I, as a mom, balance truth and grace? You see, in Chinese culture, it excels in emphasizing truth in parenting. So setting firm boundaries and having high hopes, and the whole family comes together as a team to gather all resources to ensure that our children reach their full potential and have their best shot at reaching their calling. On the other hand, American culture shines in its ability to give grace, the freedom and space for the child to explore and to discover their own path. I think when you emphasize so much on the truth, you're prone to legalism. So the child is growing up in a very restrictive and rule-centered home environment. But when you give so much freedom and license, the child lacks boundaries and they may not be challenged enough to bring out their potentials. So you might ask, how do I resolve this? It shouldn't be a surprise now that Jesus is the answer, because he is the ultimate fulfillment of both grace and truth. He is not only the truth, the way, the life, but he's also God's grace and salvation. So he is my ultimate inspiration for parenting, even though I fall short all the time. Practically, what I found most helpful is to first slow down in moments when conflict arises with my kids, when there is any challenging of boundaries. When I feel myself reacting, I pause and I ask myself, am I currently leaning too much on the discipline and truth, or am I being too lenient and lacking in structure? If I am out of balance either way, I will lean the other way. A good example is if my child disobeys, I will still enforce consequence, but I don't have to be loud or intimidating. Or if they are continuously disobeying, I will start asking questions like, are you hungry? Are you really tired? Do you need to go rest and lie down? Or they may be trying to communicate some struggles that they're having internally. So instead of continuing to enforce boundaries, I would slow down and ask them what is actually on their mind. And you'll be surprised what a 3.5-year-old is able to tell you when you genuinely care about their well-being. In terms of parenting, this is where most of my energy goes towards, is trying to strike that balance, because I can easily be overcome by my own emotions and react the way that we were used to. And that does not align with my wish to be able to start a new story with our family. Intentional parenting means not assuming that my default approach is always right. And honestly, being in a multicultural marriage really helps build that self-awareness. Because even in parenting, it forces me to question my cultural assumptions and seek God's wisdom beyond just my own experiences. And that is how I'm raising littles in a Chinese, and that is how I am raising little ones in a Chinese American family. Being a mom has honestly stretched me in ways I never expected. It's not only challenged me to redefine what a good mom is, but also to hold my parenting style to God's words instead of my cultural influences. If you are in a multicultural marriage, or if you're parenting cross-culturally, I would love to hear from you. What has been your biggest challenges or funniest cultural clashes? Drop a comment below, because because I would love to know. And before you leave, don't forget to like and subscribe and check out the video I mentioned about how I structure my daily and weekly routine as a stay-at-home mom. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!